Chuck and Doug were the talk of Whimsyville. Not because they were famous, nope. It was because of their crazy ideas.
Chuck was tall and skinny. He looked like a human noodle.
Doug was short and round. He was more like a meatball.
Together they were the town's very own spaghetti and meatballs. Chuck was always coming up with wild plans.
Let's build a treehouse on the town clock. Or we should paint the mayor's car to look like a giant hot dog.
Doug would usually try to talk him out of it, but Chuck had a way of making bad ideas sound good. And Doug, well, he always ended up going along for the ride. Their adventures were legendary in Whimsyville. There was the time they tried to catch the ghost in the old Miller house. Turns out it was just Mr. Miller sleepwalking in his underwear. Oops. Then there was the great soap bubble flood of 22. The whole town square was covered in bubbles for a week. Kids loved it. Parents, not so much.
But here's the thing about Chuck and Doug. No matter how much trouble they caused, people couldn't help but smile.
They brought excitement to Whimsyville. Sure, sometimes it was the wrong kind of excitement, like when they accidentally let all the animals out of the petting zoo. But life was never boring with those two around. It was a lazy Saturday when Chuck got his latest brilliant idea. He and Doug were hanging out in Chuck's backyard. Chuck was staring at his dad's old fire extinguisher. Suddenly his eyes lit up like Christmas trees.
Doug, I've got it. We're going to build a rocket.
Doug looked worried. He always did when Chuck said.
I've got it!
But Chuck was already explaining his master plan.
We'll use the fire extinguisher as the engine. We'll attach it to my old skateboard. Then we'll zoom around town like superheroes.
Chuck, that sounds dangerous, he said.
But Chuck wasn't listening. They spent the whole afternoon working on their rocket. Chuck found an old helmet in the garage.
For safety, he said, tapping it proudly.
Doug rolled his eyes. The helmet looked like it had already been in a few crashes. They used duct tape to attach the fire extinguisher to the skateboard. Chuck even painted flames on the sides.
Now it looks fast, he said.
By evening, their creation was ready. It looked like something from a cartoon. The skateboard was wobbling under the weight of the fire extinguisher. The helmet had more cracks than a broken egg. But Chuck was beaming with pride.
Tomorrow, he announced, we make history.
Doug gulped. He had a feeling they might be making something all right, but it probably wasn't going to be history. Sunday morning arrived, the sun was shining, birds were singing, and Chuck was ready to become Whimsyville's first astronaut. He put on the battered helmet and gave Doug a thumbs up.
Mission control, he said in a deep voice. We are go for launch.
Doug just shook his head. This was going to end badly. He could feel it in his bones. Chuck positioned himself on the rocket. He looked like a knight riding a very strange horse. With one hand he gripped the skateboard, with the other he held the fire extinguisher nozzle.
3, 2, 1, blast off, he yelled.
And then he squeezed the handle. What happened next was both amazing and terrifying. The fire extinguisher roared to life, white foam shot out the back. And Chuck, he took off like a startled cat. He zoomed down the street, leaving a trail of foam behind him. People jumped out of the way, dogs barked. Chuck was yelling, but no one could tell if it was from excitement or fear. Probably both. The rocket was going faster and faster. Chuck couldn't control it. He whizzed past the town hall. He nearly crashed into the ice cream truck, and then he saw it. Mrs. Thompson's prized rose garden. Chuck's eyes went wide. He tried to turn, he tried to stop, but it was too late. The rocket was on a collision course with the flowers. Doug watched in horror as Chuck and his crazy invention disappeared into a sea of petals and thorns. There was a moment of silence, then a high-pitched scream split the air. It wasn't Chuck, it was Mrs. Thompson. She had been watering her roses when a foam-covered boy on a skateboard crash-landed in her garden. She stood there, mouth open, watering can frozen in mid-pour.
Groaning.
Chuck sat up, dazed and covered in petals. He looked like a very confused flower arrangement. Mrs. Thompson was known for two things, her roses and her temper. Everyone expected her to explode, but then something amazing happened. She started to laugh. It began as a giggle, then it grew into a chuckle. Soon she was laughing so hard she had to sit down.
In all my years, I've never seen flowers delivered quite like that.
Chuck was relieved but confused. He had just destroyed her precious roses. Why wasn't she mad? Mrs. Thompson wiped tears from her eyes.
Oh, honey, do you know how boring it gets, just growing roses all day? This is the most excitement I've had in years.
She helped Chuck up, still chuckling.
Though next time, maybe aim for the petunias. They could use some livening up.
By now, a crowd had gathered. Everyone was laughing and talking. Even the mayor was there, shaking his head but smiling.
Chuck and Doug, what are we going to do with you two?
Doug, who had run up panting, looked sheepish, but Chuck grinned.
Well, sir, I've got this great idea for a town fountain.
Everyone groaned, but they were all smiling too. As the excitement died down and people started to head home, Chuck and Doug sat on the curb. They were covered in foam, dirt and rose petals. Chuck's rocket lay in pieces nearby. It looked sad and deflated, like a popped balloon. But strangely, both boys were grinning from ear to ear.
You know, Doug, I think I learned something today.
Doug raised an eyebrow. Chuck learning something? That was new.
I learned that sometimes the craziest ideas can bring people together. Look at everyone. When's the last time the whole town was this happy?
Doug nodded slowly.
Yeah, I guess you're right. But maybe next time we could try something less explosive?
Where's the fun in that?
But then he got serious.
You know what else I learned? I've got the best friend in the world.
He punched Doug lightly on the arm.
Thanks for always sticking by me even when my ideas are nuts.
Doug felt a warm glow inside. It wasn't from the fire extinguisher foam, it was from friendship.
That's what friends are for, to support each other, and occasionally to crash into rose bushes together.
They both burst out laughing. As they sat there, covered in the remains of their latest adventure, they realized something important. Life wasn't about being perfect. It was about having fun, being kind, and most of all, laughing together. From that day on, Chuck and Doug were known as Whimsyville's official joy spreaders. It wasn't an official title, of course. The mayor didn't give them badges or anything, but everyone knew that where Chuck and Doug went, laughter was sure to follow. They still got into trouble, a lot of trouble actually, but now people looked forward to their crazy schemes. Mrs. Thompson even let them help in her garden sometimes.
You boys have a special talent for livening things up.
Of course, helping usually meant Chuck accidentally flooding the petunias or Doug getting tangled in the tomato vines. But Mrs. Thompson didn't mind. She said her flowers grew better with a little laughter and a lot of Chuck and Doug's special brand of fertilizer. The town changed too. People started smiling more, they talked to their neighbors, they had picnics in the park, and whenever things got too quiet, someone would always ask,
"What do you think Chuck and Doug are up to?"
It became a game to guess their next adventure. Would they try to build a giant slingshot, turn the town fountain into a bubble bath? The possibilities were endless. Chuck and Doug learned an important lesson through all their misadventures. They learned that friendship, laughter, and a little bit of craziness were the key ingredients to a happy life. Sure, they still got into trouble, but now it was trouble with a purpose. They were Whimsyville's own dynamic duo, spreading joy and chaos wherever they went. And you know what? The town wouldn't have had it any other way.